Chapter 1. The Judgment Circle. The cold mountain air bit into my bare skin as rough hands shoved me forward into the clearing. Pine needles and frozen earth cut into my knees as I collapsed, my wrists still bound behind my back with coarse rope that had rubbed them raw during the 3-day journey here. "Behold," announced Elder Matthias, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd like a death knell. The human who dared to trespass in sacred territory. I kept my eyes fixed on the ground, watching my breath create small puffs of vapor in the frigid air. The humiliation burned hotter than the shame of my nakedness. They had stripped me of everything, my clothes, my dignity, my hope, leaving me with nothing but the knowledge that I was about to die for a crime I didn't even understand. The circle of werewolves pressed closer, their forms shifting restlessly between human and something far more primal. I could feel their eyes on me, hear the low growls rumbling from their throats. Some had already begun to shift, their eyes glowing amber in the twilight, elongated canines gleaming as they anticipated the kill. The punishment for violating the Moonridge Pack's sacred grounds is death, Elder Matthias continued, his weathered face twisted with cruel satisfaction. But first, you will kneel before us and beg for the mercy you do not deserve. I had been running for 3 weeks, running from Marcus, from the bruises that painted my ribs in shades of purple and yellow, from the threats that promised worse if I ever tried to leave again. I had stumbled into these mountains half dead from exhaustion, seeking nothing more than a place to hide until I could figure out my next move. I never imagined I'd walk straight into something far more dangerous than the monster I'd fled. The pack leader, a burly man named Garrett, whose neck was thick as a tree trunk, stepped forward. His boot connected with my shoulder, sending me sprawling onto my side. "Look at her," he spat. "Pathetic human filth, contaminating our sacred space with her presence." I struggled back to my knees, my bound hands making balance nearly impossible. Blood trickled from a cut on my lip where it had struck a stone. Around the circle, the werewolves were growing more agitated, their forms beginning to blur and stretch as the change threatened to overtake them. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I didn't know. I was just trying to—" "Silence!" Garrett's roar cut through my words like a blade. "Your ignorance is not our concern. You have violated laws older than your pitiful human civilization." That's when I heard it, the sound of approaching footsteps that somehow commanded instant attention from every creature in the clearing. The excited growls died away to nervous whimpers. Even Garrett, who had been puffing with righteous anger moments before, visibly paled and took an unconscious step backward. The crowd parted like water, creating a pathway that led directly to where I knelt, trembling in the center of their judgment circle. He emerged from the shadows between the towering pines like something out of an ancient myth. Tall and broad-shouldered, with midnight black hair that fell just past his collar, and eyes the color of winter storms. There was something otherworldly about the way he moved, fluid and predatory, each step calculated and purposeful. Power radiated from him in waves that made the air itself seem to thicken. Every werewolf in the clearing immediately dropped to one knee, heads bowed in submission. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Alpha King," Elder Matthias breathed, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. We did not expect you." The stranger, this Alpha King, didn't acknowledge the greeting. His storm-gray eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle with awareness. He studied me for a long moment, taking in my nakedness, my bound hands, the blood trickling from my split lip. Something flickered across his features, too quick for me to interpret, but it made several of the watching werewolves shift nervously. "What is the charge?" His voice was deep and commanding, carrying easily across the clearing despite its quiet tone. Trespassing on sacred ground, Alpha King, Garrett answered, though he kept his eyes downcast. We found her 3 days ago near the Moonfalls. She claims ignorance, but the law is clear. I know the law. The Alpha King's interruption was soft, but carried the weight of absolute authority. He stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell the wild scent of him, pine and leather and something indefinably masculine. Look at me. It wasn't a request. Slowly, I raised my eyes to meet his gaze and felt my world shift on its axis. Up close, he was even more magnificent and terrifying. His features were sharp and aristocratic, his jaw strong beneath a light shadow of stubble. But it was his eyes that held me captive, ancient and knowing, as if they had witnessed centuries of secrets I couldn't begin to imagine. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sarah," I whispered. "Sarah Blackwood." He studied me for another heartbeat, and I had the strangest sensation that he was looking not just at me, but into me, seeing things I had never shown another soul. The bruises Marcus had left were fading, but somehow I felt certain this man could see every one of them, could read the story of violence and fear written on my skin. "And why were you running, Sarah Blackwood?" The question caught me off guard. How could he possibly know I had been running? I started, then stopped, unsure how much truth was safe to share. "She was running from something," he said, and it wasn't a question this time. His eyes never left mine as he addressed the pack. "A woman doesn't flee into the wilderness wearing nothing but terror unless she fears something worse than death itself." Murmurs rippled through the assembled werewolves. I heard confusion in their voices, uncertainty about where their Alpha King was leading this conversation. "The law remains unchanged," Elder Matthias said carefully. "Sacred ground has been violated. The punishment," the Alpha King said, his voice cutting through Matthias's words like a blade through silk, "is mine to decide." He moved then, fluid and graceful, reaching up to unclasp something from around his shoulders. The heavy black cloak he had been wearing fell free, and without a word, he stepped forward and draped it around my trembling form. The fabric was warm from his body heat and softer than anything I had ever felt. It smelled like him, wild and clean and utterly masculine. As the cloak settled around my shoulders, covering my nakedness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Protection. Gasps echoed around the circle. I didn't understand their significance, but I could see shock and something that looked like fear flickering across the faces surrounding us. "Rise," the Alpha King commanded softly. On shaking legs, I struggled to my feet, the cloak pooling around me. Even standing, I barely reached his shoulder, and I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact with him. "By right of claim," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the clearing, "I take responsibility for this woman. She is under my protection." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Elder Matthias found his voice, though it came out as little more than a croak. "Alpha King, surely you cannot mean... Are you questioning my authority, Matthias?" The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 10 degrees at the quiet menace in those words. "No, Alpha King. Never. But the implications, the pack laws, will be observed." His eyes found mine again, holding my gaze with hypnotic intensity. "Won't they, Sarah?" I didn't understand what was happening, didn't comprehend the undercurrents of power and politics swirling around me. All I knew was that this dangerous, magnificent man had just saved me from certain death, and the weight of his cloak around my shoulders felt like the first safety I'd known in years. "Yes," I whispered, though I had no idea what I was agreeing to. Something that might have been satisfaction flickered in his storm-gray eyes. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the rope binding my wrists, and the bonds fell away as if they had been made of paper. "Good," he said quietly. Then louder, addressing the pack, "The judgment is concluded. Return to your homes." The werewolves began to disperse, but I could hear their whispered conversations, could feel their curious and sometimes hostile stares. Whatever had just happened, it was far from over. The Alpha King watched until the last of them had melted back into the forest shadows. Then he turned to me, and I saw something vulnerable flicker across his features before he could mask it. "Come," he said simply. "We have much to discuss." As I followed him into the darkness between the trees, his cloak heavy and warm around my shoulders, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just changed in ways I couldn't begin to understand. Whatever lay ahead, there was no going back to the world I had known. The human woman who had stumbled into these mountains was gone forever. Chapter 2. The Alpha's Sanctuary. The Alpha King's cabin materialized from the darkness like something out of a fever dream. Massive logs formed walls that stretched up into the star-scattered sky, and warm, golden light spilled from windows that seemed to beckon me toward safety. After 3 weeks of sleeping rough and 3 days of captivity, the sight of actual shelter made my knees weak with relief. He hadn't spoken during our 20-minute walk through the forest, but I'd felt his presence like a physical thing, protective and overwhelming in equal measure. Every few steps, he would glance back to ensure I was keeping up, his storm-gray eyes unreadable in the moonlight. "Inside," he said quietly, pushing open a heavy wooden door. The interior took my breath away. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames dancing cheerfully in the hearth and casting dancing shadows across rich leather furniture and gleaming hardwood floors. The space felt both rustic and refined, clearly the domain of someone accustomed to power and comfort. I stood just inside the doorway, suddenly uncertain. His cloak was still wrapped around me, but beneath it I remained naked and vulnerable. The reality of my situation was beginning to sink in through the shock and adrenaline. I was alone with a man I didn't know, in a place I'd never been, surrounded by creatures that existed only in nightmares. "You're safe here," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "I give you my word." Something in his voice made me believe him, though I couldn't have explained why. "What should I call you?" I asked. Everyone kept saying, "Alpha King." "But surely you have a name." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Kieran Blackthorn." He moved to a cabinet near the fireplace, withdrawing a crystal decanter filled with amber liquid. "And you, Sarah Blackwood, are going to tell me why you were running through my territory half dead from exhaustion." The way he said my name sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. "Your territory?" "These mountains, this forest, everything for 100 miles in any direction belongs to the Moonridge Pack. And as their Alpha King, that makes it mine." He poured 2 glasses of what looked like whiskey, offering one to me. "But you didn't know that when you stumbled into our sacred grounds, did you?" I accepted the glass with trembling hands, careful to keep the cloak wrapped around me. I didn't know any of this existed. Werewolves, pack territories, sacred grounds. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. Your world and ours exist side by side, separated by nothing more than willful ignorance and careful concealment. He settled into one of the leather chairs near the fire, gesturing for me to take the one across from him. But that doesn't explain why a human woman was fleeing into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back, which you'd apparently lost somewhere along the way. Heat flooded my cheeks. There was a river. The current was stronger than I expected, and I lost everything trying to get across. It was partly true, at least. I had lost my backpack and most of my clothes crossing a swollen stream 2 days into my flight. But the whole truth was far more complicated and infinitely more humiliating. Kieran's eyes narrowed slightly. Try again. And this time, don't leave out the part about who was chasing you. My hand tightened around the whiskey glass. What makes you think someone was chasing me? Because I can smell the fear on you. Not the fresh terror from tonight's ordeal, but something older. Something that's been eating at you for weeks. He leaned forward, his intense gaze never wavering from mine. Someone hurt you, didn't they? The gentle certainty in his voice broke something inside me that I'd been desperately trying to hold together. His name is Marcus Hale. He is my ex-fiancé. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. I thought I loved him. For 2 years, I thought what we had was real. What changed? Kieran's voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the dangerous undertone lurking beneath the surface. I found out he'd been lying about everything. His job, his finances, even his name, none of it was real. When I confronted him, I touched my ribs unconsciously, remembering the sickening crack of his fist connecting with bone. He made it very clear that I belonged to him, whether I wanted to or not. The wedding was in 3 weeks. He said if I tried to leave, he'd make sure I never made it far enough to matter. Kieran's knuckles had gone white around his whiskey glass. And yet, here you are. I waited until he left for a business trip. Then I grabbed what I could and ran. I've been moving for 3 weeks, staying off main roads, avoiding towns where someone might remember seeing me. I took a sip of the whiskey, welcoming the burn as it slid down my throat. I thought if I could just disappear into the wilderness for a while, maybe he'd give up looking for me. Instead, you found us. There was something almost tender in Kieran's expression now. Or perhaps we found you. What happens now? The question came out smaller than I'd intended. Your people wanted to execute me for trespassing. You stopped them, but I don't understand why. And I certainly don't understand what you meant by claiming responsibility for me. Kieran was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. My pack follows ancient laws, Sarah. Laws that govern everything from territorial boundaries to mating bonds. What I did tonight, it has implications neither of us may be prepared for. What kind of implications? The kind that bind one person to another in ways that transcend human understanding. He met my eyes, and I saw conflict warring in their gray depths. By placing my cloak around you and claiming you under my protection, I invoked laws as old as our species. In the eyes of my pack, you now belong to me. My blood ran cold. Belong to you? Like property? No. The denial was swift and fierce. Never like property, but there are expectations, responsibilities. Both for you and for me. He set down his glass and ran a hand through his dark hair. I should have let them kill you. It would have been kinder in the long run. Then why didn't you? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I was only beginning to grasp. Kieran rose from his chair and moved to the window, his silhouette outlined against the glass. Because the moment I saw you kneeling there, broken and defiant and absolutely terrified, something inside me recognized something inside you. He turned back to face me, and the raw honesty in his expression took my breath away. I've spent 3 centuries walking this earth, Sarah. 3 centuries of responsibility and duty and absolute solitude. I thought I was content with that existence. 3 centuries? I whispered. That's impossible. Is it? You've just learned that werewolves exist, that there are entire societies hidden within your world that operate by rules your kind have never dreamed of. Is immortality really so hard to accept? I stared at him, trying to reconcile this revelation with the man sitting across from me. He looked no older than 35, but now that I knew what to look for, I could see the weight of ages in his eyes. The careful way he held himself that spoke of hard-won experience and old pain. What are you saying, Kieran? I'm saying that for the first time in 3 centuries, I met someone who made me want to break every rule I've lived by. He moved closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. I'm saying that when I saw you tonight, something deep inside me whispered a word I thought I'd never hear. What word? His answer was barely a whisper, but it echoed through the cabin like thunder. Mine. The glass slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor in a crystalline explosion that seemed to punctuate the enormity of what he'd just revealed. But I barely noticed, because I was drowning in the intensity of his gaze, in the absolute certainty I heard in that single, devastating word. Whatever was happening between us, whatever forces had conspired to bring me to this moment, I had the terrible suspicion that my choice had already been made for me. The only question now was whether I was brave enough to accept it. Chapter 3. Secrets in the Firelight. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire as I stared at the shattered glass scattered across the floor. The amber liquid spread in a dark stain across the polished wood, but I couldn't bring myself to move, couldn't process anything beyond that single word he'd spoken with such devastating certainty. Mine. I should clean this up, I whispered, finally finding my voice. Leave it. Kieran's tone was gentle but commanding. You're bleeding. I looked down and saw he was right. A small shard had nicked my ankle, leaving a thin line of crimson against my pale skin. I hadn't even felt it happen. Without asking permission, Kieran dropped to one knee beside my chair. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he examined the small cut, and I found myself holding my breath at his proximity. This close, I could see the fine lines around his eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the coolness of his skin. It's not deep, he murmured, producing a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket. But it needs to be cleaned. His touch sent electricity racing up my leg as he carefully pressed the fabric against the cut. I gripped the arms of my chair, fighting the urge to jerk away, not from fear, but from the intensity of my body's response to him. Kieran, I started, then stopped, unsure what I wanted to say. I know. He didn't look up from tending my ankle. I know this is overwhelming. I know you have every reason to be terrified. But I need you to understand something, Sarah. What happened tonight wasn't a coincidence. What do you mean? He finished cleaning the cut and sat back on his heels, finally meeting my eyes. 3 nights ago, I had a dream. A vision, actually. They're not uncommon for my kind. I saw a woman with dark hair and eyes like midnight, running through my forest. She was hurt, desperate, and completely alone. In the vision, she was meant to die. My blood turned to ice. Die how? Execution, just as you nearly did tonight. He stood, moving to dispose of the bloodied handkerchief and gather the larger pieces of broken glass. But in my vision, I wasn't there to stop it. I watched from the shadows as my pack tore her apart, and I woke with the taste of regret so bitter it nearly choked me. I pulled his cloak tighter around myself, suddenly feeling more exposed than ever. You're saying you foresaw my death? I'm saying the fates have a twisted sense of humor. He finished cleaning up the glass and moved to pour himself another drink. For 3 centuries I've been alone, not by choice initially. My mate died long before I became Alpha King. But eventually, solitude became familiar. Safe. I told myself I preferred it that way. Your mate? The word slipped out before I could stop it, heavy with an emotion I didn't want to examine too closely. Something flickered across his features. Old pain, carefully controlled. Elena. She was human, like you. We had 2 years together before a rival pack killed her to get to me. He took a long swallow of whiskey. After that, I swore I'd never put another innocent life at risk. The burden of caring for someone, of being responsible for their safety in this world, It's not one I intended to carry again. Then why? I whispered. Why claim me? Why invoke laws that bind us together when you could have just let me go? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion I couldn't identify. Because when I saw you tonight, kneeling in that circle with blood on your lips and defiance in your eyes, you looked exactly like the woman from my vision. And in that moment, I realized something that terrifies me more than any enemy I've ever faced. What? The fates weren't showing me a future to prevent, Sarah. They were showing me a future to claim. The words hung between us like a confession. I found myself studying his face in the firelight, noting the way shadows played across his sharp features, the way his hands remained perfectly steady despite the tension radiating from his frame. I don't understand any of this, I admitted. 3 days ago, my biggest worry was whether Marcus would find me before I could disappear completely. Now I'm sitting in a werewolf's cabin, apparently bound to him by ancient laws I don't comprehend, being told that my death was foretold in a prophetic dream. It is a lot, he agreed, settling back into his chair across from me. Which is why I'm going to give you a choice. That caught my attention. What kind of choice? You can stay here tonight, rest, recover your strength. In the morning, I'll give you clothes, supplies, and safe passage to whatever destination you choose. The pack law will consider my debt to you fulfilled, and you'll be free to disappear as completely as you originally intended. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by something that felt disturbingly like disappointment. And the alternative? You stay. You let me teach you about our world, our laws, our ways. You accept the protection that comes with being under my claim, along with all the complications that entails. His gray eyes held mine steadily. But understand, Sarah, if you choose to stay, there's no going back. Once you're truly part of this world, the human life you knew is over forever. I stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker while my mind raced. The smart choice was obvious. Take his offer of safe passage and run as far and fast as I could. Find some distant city where neither Marcus nor mysterious werewolf politics could touch me. But as I sat there wrapped in Kieran's cloak, feeling more protected than I had in months, I found myself thinking about the loneliness in his voice when he'd spoken of 3 centuries of solitude. About the way he'd looked at me in that clearing, as if I was something precious and unexpected. What would it mean? I asked quietly. To be under your claim? It would mean you'd live here, in my territory. You'd be under the protection of the entire pack, which would make you safer than you've ever been in your life. But it would also mean navigating pack politics, learning our customs, and accepting that your life is now intertwined with mine in ways that go beyond human understanding. And romantically? The question came out barely above a whisper, but I had to know. Kieran's knuckles whitened around his glass. That would be entirely your choice. The claim creates a bond, but it doesn't force feelings that aren't there. Whatever happens between us personally would happen because we both want it to. But you said I was yours. I said something in me recognized you as mine. He corrected carefully. There's a difference. The first is about possession. The second is about... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Recognition. Like finding something you didn't know you'd lost. I understood that feeling better than I wanted to admit. Sitting here with him felt strangely natural, as if some part of me had been waiting for this moment without realizing it. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course. He stood, moving toward a hallway that presumably led to bedrooms. You can have my room tonight. I'll take the couch. Kieran, I called as he reached the doorway. Yes? In your vision, was I alone when I died? His expression grew impossibly gentle. No, Sarah. You weren't alone. Even in death, someone was holding you. As he disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone with the dying fire and the weight of an impossible decision, I couldn't shake the feeling that I already knew what my choice would be. The only question was whether I was brave enough to make it. Chapter 4. Dawn Revelations. I didn't sleep. For hours, I lay in Kieran's massive bed, wrapped in sheets that carried his scent, pine and leather, and something wild that made my pulse quicken despite my exhaustion. The room was a study in masculine elegance, dark wood furniture, rich fabrics, and windows that offered a breathtaking view of the mountain valley below. Everything spoke of wealth and power, but also of someone who valued quality over ostentation. As dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, I finally gave up pretending I could rest and made my way to the kitchen. I found Kieran there, standing at the stove with his back to me, cooking what smelled like bacon and eggs. He'd changed from his formal clothes into jeans and a dark sweater that clung to his broad shoulders, making him look more approachable, but no less dangerous. You didn't sleep either, I observed, pulling his cloak tighter around me. He glanced over his shoulder, and I caught something vulnerable in his expression before he masked it. Old habits. I don't require as much rest as humans do. Perks of being a centuries-old werewolf? Among other things. He turned back to the stove, but I saw his shoulders tense slightly. How do you like your eggs? However you're making them is fine. I settled onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island, studying his profile in the morning light. Kieran? Last night, when you said the word mine, have you ever said that about anyone else? Since Elena? His hand stilled on the spatula. For a moment, the only sound was the sizzle of eggs in the pan. No, he said finally. Never. Why me? What is it about me that's different? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with honesty. I wish I knew. All I can tell you is that when I saw you in that clearing, every instinct I possess screamed at me to protect you. Not because you were innocent, though you are. Not because you were in danger, though you were. But because something deep inside me recognized something deep inside you. He turned to face me. His storm-gray eyes intense. It's like, have you ever heard a song that you'd never heard before, but somehow knew all the words to? I nodded slowly, understanding exactly what he meant. That's what it was like when I saw you. Recognition without explanation. Like my soul had been waiting for yours without my conscious mind realizing it. The eggs were starting to burn, but neither of us moved to rescue them. The air between us crackled with tension and possibility. The mate bond, I said quietly, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. That's what this is, isn't it? What you felt when you saw me. His jaw tightened. Possibly. But true mate bonds are rare, Sarah. Especially between our kind and humans. It's more likely that what I'm feeling is simply... He trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. Simply what? Loneliness. 3 centuries of it, making me read too much into a chance encounter with a woman who needs protection. He turned back to the stove, scraping the slightly burned eggs onto plates with more force than necessary. It would be foolish to assume it's anything more significant than that. But even as he said the words, I could tell he didn't believe them any more than I did. There was something between us, something that went beyond attraction or convenience, or even the heightened emotions of our dramatic first meeting. It was as if invisible threads were weaving themselves around us, binding us together in ways neither of us fully understood. Tell me about her, I said as he set a plate in front of me. Elena, what was she like? Pain flickered across his features. Why would you want to know about her? Because she was important to you. Because understanding your past might help me understand... this. I gestured between us. He poured himself coffee from an expensive-looking machine. His movements careful and controlled. Elena was light. Pure light in a world that had been dark for too long. She laughed easily, trusted completely, saw the good in everyone, even me, when I couldn't see it in myself. How did you meet? She was a nurse in a small town near our territory. I'd been injured in a challenge fight, another alpha who thought he could take my position. She found me bleeding out in the forest and somehow managed to get me back to her clinic. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She spent 3 days nursing me back to health, and by the time I was strong enough to leave, I knew I'd never be able to walk away from her. But you were already Alpha King then? I was, which made our relationship incredibly dangerous for her. My enemies knew that the fastest way to destroy me was to destroy what I loved most. His hands tightened around his coffee mug. I should have stayed away from her. Should have been strong enough to leave her to a normal, safe human life. But you weren't. No. I was selfish. I wanted her more than I wanted her safety, and that selfishness got her killed. He met my eyes, and I saw centuries of guilt and regret staring back at me. Which is why I'm giving you the choice I never gave her. The chance to walk away before you're in too deep to escape. I took a bite of eggs, buying myself time to think. They were perfectly cooked despite his distraction, and I wondered how many lonely breakfasts he'd prepared for himself over the centuries. What if I don't want to escape? The words slipped out before I could stop them. His entire body went still. Sarah, I know it's crazy. I know I should take your offer and run as far as I can. But for the first time in my life, someone looked at me like I was worth protecting, worth saving, worth claiming. I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly gone. Do you know what it's like to spend your entire life feeling invisible? To have the person who's supposed to love you treat you like property to be controlled rather than a person to be cherished? Is that what he did? Marcus? From almost the beginning. It was subtle at first. Suggestions about what I should wear, who I should spend time with, how I should act in public. By the end, I wasn't allowed to work, wasn't allowed to see my friends, wasn't even allowed to leave the house without his permission. I touched my ribs unconsciously, remembering. And when I finally found the courage to say no, he hurt you. He made it very clear that I belonged to him, whether I wanted to or not. That my wishes, my feelings, my autonomy didn't matter. I looked up at Kieran, seeing the dangerous darkness gathering in his eyes. But last night, when you said I was yours, it didn't feel like possession. It felt like recognition, like finally being seen. Sarah. My name was a rough whisper on his lips. I'm not Elena, I said firmly. I'm not light and pure and innocent. I'm broken and scared and probably more trouble than I'm worth. But if you're willing to teach me about your world, if you're willing to be patient while I figure out how to exist in it, then I want to stay. The silence that followed was charged with electricity. Kieran stared at me as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard, as if he was afraid to hope. The pack won't make it easy for you, he warned. You're human, which makes you weak in their eyes. You're under my protection, which makes you a potential target for my enemies. And if what's between us develops into something more, then we'll face it together. I reached across the island, covering his hand with mine. His skin was warm and slightly rough, and I felt that now familiar jolt of electricity at the contact. I've spent my whole life running from things that scared me, Kieran. I'm tired of running. He turned his hand palm up, his fingers interlacing with mine. Then stay, he said simply. Stay and let me show you what it means to be truly claimed. Not as property, but as what? His thumb traced across my knuckles, sending shivers up my arm. As everything. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the pack territory coming to life. Voices in the distance, the slam of doors, the everyday sounds of a community I was about to become part of. It should have terrified me. But instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Chapter 5. Pack Dynamics. The clothes Kieran brought me were clearly borrowed from someone in the pack. Dark jeans that fit well enough and a forest green sweater that was soft against my skin. As I dressed in his bedroom, I caught glimpses of myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My dark hair was still tangled from my ordeal, and my skin was pale from weeks of poor sleep and inadequate food. But there was something different in my eyes. A spark that had been missing for longer than I cared to admit. When I emerged from the bedroom, I found Kieran waiting by the front door, his expression carefully neutral. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as someone can be to meet a pack of werewolves who wanted to execute her 12 hours ago, I replied, attempting levity despite my churning stomach. His lips quirked upward. "They'll behave themselves. I've made my position clear." "And what position is that, exactly?" "That you're under my direct protection. That any insult to you is an insult to me. And that anyone who fails to show you proper respect will answer to me personally." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority, but I caught the underlying tension. "That's going to make me popular," I muttered. "You're not here to be popular, Sarah. You're here to be safe." He reached for the door handle, then paused. "But I should warn you, pack dynamics are complex. There are hierarchies, traditions, and politics that you'll need to navigate. Watch, listen, and follow my lead." The pack's central compound was larger than I'd expected. A collection of cabins and buildings arranged around a central lodge that looked like something from a luxury resort. Werewolves moved between the structures with casual grace, their conversations dying as we approached. I felt the weight of their stares, some curious, others openly hostile. "Alpha King," a woman called out as we passed. She was tall and athletic with auburn hair and predatory amber eyes. "I see you've brought your pet." Kieran's entire demeanor shifted, power rolling off him in waves that made several nearby pack members step back. "Lydia," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "I believe we discussed proper forms of address." The woman, Lydia, had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but her amber eyes remained cold as they fixed on me. "Of course. My apologies, Alpha King. And to you as well. Sarah, isn't it?" "Yes," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Welcome to Moonridge territory. I hope you find your stay educational." There was something in the way she said stay that made it clear she considered my presence temporary at best. Before I could respond, Kieran's hand settled on the small of my back, his touch both possessive and reassuring. "Lydia is our pack's head enforcer," he explained as we continued walking. "She's also my former lover." I stumbled slightly. "Oh, that's good to know." "It ended decades ago," he added quietly, "but she's never fully accepted that it was over. And now I'm here, complicating things." "You're here because you belong here," he said firmly. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." We reached the central lodge and Kieran pushed open heavy oak doors to reveal a space that took my breath away. The interior was all soaring ceilings, massive timber beams, and stone fireplaces large enough to roast an entire deer. Pack members filled the space, their conversations creating a low buzz that died as we entered. Elder Matthias sat at a long table near the largest fireplace, his weathered face impassive as he watched our approach. Around him sat other pack leaders, their expressions ranging from curious to openly disapproving. "Alpha King," Matthias said, rising from his chair. "We need to discuss the implications of last night's decision." There's nothing to discuss, Kieran replied smoothly. I invoked my right of claim. The matter is settled. Is it? Another elder, a woman with silver-streaked hair and piercing green eyes, spoke up. You've bound yourself to a human, Kieran. A human who violated our most sacred laws. The pack is concerned. The pack will adapt, Kieran said, his tone brooking no argument. As they always have. And if she proves to be a liability... Lydia had followed us inside, her voice carrying clearly across the lodge. If her presence here brings danger to our people, then I will handle it, Kieran replied, as I handle all threats to this pack. I felt like a specimen under a microscope as dozens of eyes studied me, evaluating, judging, finding me wanting. These were predators, every one of them, and I was very clearly prey in their estimation. Perhaps, said a young man with dark hair and kind eyes, we should give Sarah a chance to speak for herself. After all, she's the one whose life was forever changed last night. Kieran nodded approvingly at the speaker. This is my nephew, David. He serves as our pack's liaison for delicate situations. David stepped forward, offering me a genuine smile. Welcome to Moonridge, Sarah. I know this must be overwhelming, but I hope you'll find friends here. Thank you, I managed, grateful for his kindness. Tell us, Elder Matthias said, his voice carefully neutral. What do you hope to gain from your association with our Alpha King? The question was clearly loaded, designed to make me look mercenary or manipulative regardless of how I answered. I felt Kieran tense beside me, but his earlier words echoed in my mind. Watch, listen, and follow my lead. I hope to learn, I said carefully. To understand your world, your customs, your ways. I hope to prove that I'm worthy of the protection your Alpha King has offered me, and perhaps to find a place where I belong. And what are you willing to sacrifice for that belonging? Lydia asked, her tone sharp. What are you prepared to give up? I thought of Marcus, of the bruises he'd left on my body and soul, of the small, suffocating life I'd been living, always walking on eggshells, always afraid. Of the woman I'd become under his control, timid, invisible, forgotten. Everything, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. I'm willing to sacrifice everything I was to become who I'm meant to be. Murmurs rippled through the assembled pack. Some seemed impressed by my answer, others skeptical. But Kieran's hand squeezed my shoulder, and I felt his approval like a warm glow in my chest. Bold words, Matthias observed. But words are easy, human. Actions are what matter in our world. Then give me the chance to prove myself through actions, I challenged, meeting his gaze steadily. Don't judge me based on fears and assumptions. Judge me based on what I do, not what I am. The silence stretched taut as the pack leaders exchanged glances. Finally, Matthias nodded slowly. Very well. You will be given that chance. But understand this, Sarah Blackwood. Our world is not forgiving of weakness. If you cannot adapt, if you cannot prove your worth, then your stay here will indeed be temporary. I understand. Good. He turned to Kieran. She'll need training, combat skills, pack protocols, our history and laws. Who will you assign as her mentor? I'll handle her training myself, Kieran said immediately. Lydia's eyes flashed. Is that wise, Alpha King? Your duties to the pack are already extensive. Perhaps someone with more objectivity would be better suited to the task. Are you volunteering, Lydia? Kieran's voice carried a dangerous edge. If necessary. Her smile was sharp as a blade. I'm sure I could teach her everything she needs to know about surviving in our world. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized I'd just become a pawn in a much larger game of pack politics and personal vendettas. But as Kieran's hand settled protectively on my shoulder, I also realized something else. I wasn't facing this alone. "Thank you for the offer," Kieran said smoothly. "But I prefer to handle important matters personally." The emphasis on important wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Lydia, whose expression darkened considerably. As the pack began to disperse, conversations resuming in smaller groups, I caught fragments of whispered speculation and debate. My presence had clearly upset the established order, and I had the feeling the real challenges were just beginning. "That went better than I expected," David said, appearing at my elbow with an encouraging smile. "Really? Because I felt like I was being sized up for dinner." "You were," he said cheerfully. "But you didn't back down, which impressed them more than you realize. Most humans would have been trembling by now." "Who says I'm not trembling?" He laughed. "Fair point, but you're hiding it well." As Kieran finished speaking with the elders and rejoined us, I wondered if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. Pack politics, ancient laws, werewolf hierarchies. It was a world away from anything I'd ever experienced. But when Kieran looked at me with those storm gray eyes, when his presence made me feel safer than I'd ever felt in my life, I knew I'd made the right choice. Now I just had to survive it. Chapter 6. The First Lesson. The training grounds were located behind the main lodge, a cleared area surrounded by towering pines that created a natural amphitheater. As Kieran led me there after lunch, I noticed several pack members finding excuses to linger nearby, their curiosity barely concealed. "Ignore them," Kieran murmured, sensing my discomfort. "They're just curious to see if you'll survive your first day of training." That's not particularly reassuring. It wasn't meant to be reassuring. It was meant to be honest. He stopped in the center of the clearing, turning to face me. "Before we begin, I need to ask you something important. Have you ever fought back?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Against Marcus. When he hurt you, did you ever fight back?" Heat flooded my cheeks as shame twisted in my chest. No, not really. The first time he hit me, I was so shocked I just froze. After that, fighting back only made it worse. So I learned to... I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "To submit," Kieran said quietly, and there was no judgment in his voice, only understanding. "To make yourself small and invisible, hoping it would end sooner." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "That instinct kept you alive in his world, Sarah, but it will get you killed in mine." He stepped closer, his presence both comforting and commanding. "Here, strength is respected. Weakness is exploited. If you're going to survive among wolves, you need to learn to bare your teeth." "I don't know if I can," I whispered. "I don't know if I have that kind of strength in me." "You do." His certainty was absolute. "You had the strength to leave Marcus. You had the strength to survive 3 weeks on your own in the wilderness. You had the strength to face execution with your head held high. The warrior in you is there, Sarah. We just need to wake her up." He moved to a wooden rack along the edge of the clearing, selecting what looked like padded training gloves. "We'll start simple. Basic self-defense, building your confidence and your instincts. The goal isn't to make you a fighter overnight. It's to help you remember that you have the right to defend yourself." As he helped me put on the gloves, his fingers brushing against my wrists, I felt that familiar jolt of electricity. But this time, instead of making me feel vulnerable, it made me feel powerful. As if his touch was awakening something that had been sleeping. "Now," he said, stepping back and raising his hands in a defensive position. "I want you to hit me." I stared at him. "What? No, I can't hit you." "Why not?" Because you're..." I struggled to find the words. "You're being kind to me. You saved my life. I can't just hit you. Sarah. His voice was gentle but firm. This is exactly the conditioning we need to break. You've been taught that you don't have the right to defend yourself, even in a training situation. That you should be grateful for any kindness, even if it comes at the cost of your own agency. His words hit me like a physical blow. He was right, and the truth of it burned. I want you to imagine I'm not Kieran right now. He continued. I want you to imagine I'm Marcus, that I'm someone who wants to hurt you, to control you, to make you small. And I want you to show me what you wish you'd done to him. The suggestion should have horrified me, but instead, I felt something dark and fierce stir in my chest. All those times Marcus had cornered me, all those moments when I'd bitten my tongue and taken his abuse, all the rage I'd swallowed down and buried deep. My first swing was tentative, barely connecting with Kieran's palm. Pathetic, he said, and his voice had gone cold, dismissive. Is that really the best you can do? No wonder he found you so easy to break. Anger flared through me. Don't what? Don't tell the truth? You let him turn you into a victim, Sarah. You chose to be weak. I knew what he was doing, using my own insecurities against me to provoke a response. But knowing didn't make it hurt less, didn't make the shame burn any cooler. Stop, I whispered. Make me stop. His smile was cruel, nothing like the gentle expression I'd grown used to. Oh, that's right. You don't know how. You only know how to take whatever people give you. The rage that had been building exploded outward. I swung at him with everything I had, my fist connecting solidly with his palm. The impact sent vibrations up my arm, but instead of pain, I felt satisfaction. Better, he said, and his voice was warm again, proud. Again. This time I didn't hesitate. I threw punch after punch, each one harder than the last, releasing years of pent-up fury and frustration. I hit him for every bruise Marcus had left on my body, for every cruel word he'd spoken, for every time he'd made me feel worthless and afraid. I hit him for the woman I'd been, and I hit him for the woman I was becoming. When I finally stopped, breathing hard and trembling with adrenaline, Kieran was smiling at me with something that looked like pride. How do you feel? He asked. Powerful, I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. Angry, but powerful. Good. That's exactly how you should feel. He removed my gloves, his touch gentle once more. The anger is fuel, Sarah. It's not something to be ashamed of or to suppress. It's energy that can be channeled, controlled, used. I've never felt anything like that before, I said, still trying to process the intensity of what had just happened. It was like something inside me had been caged. And suddenly the door was open. That's exactly what it was. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across my cheekbones. You've spent so long believing you were powerless that you forgot you had claws. The tenderness in his touch, combined with the lingering adrenaline from our training session, created a potent combination. I found myself leaning into his touch, craving more contact, more connection. Kieran, I whispered, and his name on my lips sounded different now, hungrier, more confident. His pupils dilated, and I caught the sharp intake of his breath. For a moment, the air between us crackled with possibility. Then he stepped back, putting distance between us. We should get you cleaned up, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Tonight is the pack dinner. Everyone will be watching to see how you handle yourself. Right. The pack. I'd been so caught up in the moment, in the intoxicating rush of newfound strength and the magnetic pull of Kieran's presence, that I'd almost forgotten we had an audience. A quick glance around the clearing revealed several pack members still lingering at the edges, their expressions ranging from impressed to speculative. Lydia stood near the tree line. her amber eyes fixed on Kieran and me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Let them watch," I said, surprising myself with the boldness of the statement. "I'm not ashamed of getting stronger." Kieran's eyes flashed with approval and something deeper, something that made heat pool in my belly. "No," he agreed, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "You shouldn't be." As we walked back toward his cabin, I caught sight of my reflection in a window and barely recognized the woman staring back. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes bright with newfound confidence, and there was something different in the way I held myself. Straighter, stronger, more self-assured. The broken, frightened woman who had knelt naked in that judgment circle was still there, would always be part of my story. But she was no longer the only story I had to tell. "Thank you," I said as we reached Kieran's front door. "For what?" "For helping me remember who I could be." He paused with his hand on the doorknob, looking back at me with an expression so intense it took my breath away. "You don't need to thank me for that, Sarah. You were always strong. I just helped you remember it." As he opened the door and gestured for me to precede him inside, I felt the truth of his words settling into my bones. I was strong. I always had been. And tonight, at the pack dinner, I was going to show them all exactly what that strength looked like. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, for the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to a challenge. Chapter 7. Pack Politics and Dangerous Games. The pack dinner was held in the great hall of the main lodge, a cavernous space lit by wrought iron chandeliers and the warm glow of multiple fireplaces. Long wooden tables had been arranged in a U-shape, with the head table elevated on a dais where the pack leadership would sit. The air buzzed with conversation and laughter. But I noticed how conversations died as Kieran and I entered together. I had spent an hour getting ready, borrowing more clothes from the pack's communal wardrobe, this time a deep burgundy dress that hugged my curves and fell just below my knees. It was more form-fitting than anything I'd worn in years, and I felt both exposed and empowered by the way it made me look. The training session had awakened something in me, a confidence that I was determined to hold on to. "Remember," Kieran murmured as we made our way toward the head table, "you belong here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." His hand rested on the small of my back, a gesture of both support and possession that wasn't lost on the watching pack members. I could feel their eyes following our progress, measuring, judging, waiting to see if I would crumble under the pressure. Elder Matthias stood as we approached the dais. "Alpha King, Sarah. Welcome." Kieran nodded, pulling out a chair for me, not at the end of the table where a guest might sit, but directly to his right, in the position traditionally reserved for the alpha's mate. The symbolism wasn't subtle, and the ripple of shocked murmurs that followed made it clear that everyone understood the implication. "Is that appropriate?" Lydia's voice carried clearly from her seat at the main table. "She's human, unmated. Surely there are protocols." "There are," Kieran said, his tone cutting through her objections like a blade. "And as Alpha King, I decide how they're applied." His eyes swept the room, challenging anyone to contradict him. "Sarah sits where I want her to sit." The message was clear. Question her position, and you question his authority. No one was foolish enough to push further, but I could see the calculation in their eyes, the political maneuvering already beginning. Dinner began with the traditional pack rituals, acknowledgements of successful hunts, reports from various territorial patrols, and discussions of pack business. I listened carefully, trying to understand the complex web of relationships and responsibilities that govern this community. "The eastern border has been quiet," David reported from his position halfway down the table. "No sign of Blackwood pack incursions this week." "Good," Kieran replied, "but maintain regular patrols. Victor Blackwood isn't known for staying quiet for long." "Speaking of threats," Lydia interjected smoothly, What protocols are we implementing regarding our newest resident? Security measures, information compartmentalization, that sort of thing? The question was clearly directed at me, though she addressed it to Kieran. I felt the weight of the room's attention focus on me like a spotlight. Sarah will be granted full pack privileges, Kieran said firmly. She'll have access to common areas, participate in pack activities, and be included in all non-classified discussions. All of them? Elder Matthias raised an eyebrow. Even matters of pack security, military strategy, territorial disputes? Is there a reason she shouldn't be? Kieran's voice carried a dangerous edge. She's human, Lydia said bluntly. No offense intended, but her loyalties aren't bound by blood or pack law. What happens if she decides to leave? What happens if she's captured by enemies who want to extract information about our defenses, our numbers, our capabilities? The hall had gone silent, every eye fixed on me. I could feel the weight of their suspicion, their doubt, their fear that I would be a liability they couldn't afford. What happens, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the silence, is that you'll have made the mistake of underestimating me. Lydia's eyebrows rose. Excuse me? I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room track my movement. The confidence from the training session still hummed in my veins, and I drew on it now. You're all sitting here talking about me like I'm not present, discussing my loyalties, my trustworthiness, my worth to this pack as if I'm a commodity to be evaluated rather than a person who's chosen to be here. I let my gaze sweep the room, meeting as many eyes as I could. So let me be clear about something. The silence was deafening. I didn't stumble into your territory by accident, looking for handouts or easy protection. I was running from a man who treated me like property, who believed he owned me body and soul. I've spent the last 3 weeks surviving in wilderness that would kill most people, living on scraps and determination because I chose freedom over security. My voice grew stronger with each word. You want to question my loyalty? My commitment? Fine. But understand this, I didn't choose safety. I could have stayed with Marcus, lived in a comfortable house, had all my material needs met. I chose danger. I chose uncertainty. I chose the possibility of something better over the guarantee of something safe. I turned to face Lydia directly. You think I'm weak because I'm human? Because I don't have claws or supernatural strength? I may not be able to shift into a wolf, but I survived a predator who tried to break me for 2 years. I found the strength to leave everything I knew behind. And when your pack wanted to execute me, I knelt in that circle with blood on my lips and refused to beg. The room was so quiet I could hear the crackling of the fires. So if you want to test my loyalties, if you want to question my commitment to this pack and to your Alpha King, then do it openly. Challenge me directly. But don't sit there making plans about me while pretending I'm not capable of making my own choices. I sat down, my heart hammering in my chest. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Then, slowly, David began to clap. The sound echoed in the vast hall, joined gradually by others until approximately half the pack was applauding. The other half sat in stunned silence, clearly unsure how to respond to such a direct challenge. Kieran's hand found mine under the table, his fingers interlacing with mine in a gesture of support that sent warmth racing up my arm. When I glanced at him, the pride and something deeper, something that looked like admiration, in his eyes made my breath catch. Well, Elder Matthias said dryly, I think that answers any questions about her spine. Lydia's expression had gone through several changes during my speech, settling finally on something that looked almost like respect. You make a compelling argument, she admitted, but words are easy. Actions are what matter in our world. Then give me the chance to prove myself through actions, I replied, echoing the challenge I'd made that morning. But do it fairly. Don't set me up to fail and then claim it proves your point about human weakness. She leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile playing at her lips. What did you have in mind? Before I could respond, Kieran's grip on my hand tightened in warning. I glanced at him and saw concern flickering in his storm-gray eyes. Sarah? He said quietly. You don't have to. Yes, I do. I squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his touch. If I'm going to be part of this pack, I need to earn my place. Not through your protection, but through my own merit. I looked back at Lydia, meeting her amber gaze steadily. What would constitute a fair test? Her smile widened, showing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be. How about a hunt? The suggestion sent another ripple of murmurs through the hall. Several pack members looked shocked. Others intrigued. A hunt? I repeated. Tomorrow night is the new moon. Perfect hunting weather. The pack traditionally divides into teams for a territorial sweep. Partly practical patrol work, partly training exercise, partly competition. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Join a team. Keep up with wolves in their element. Prove you can contribute rather than just survive. It was a trap, obviously. I was human. Slower. Weaker. Lacking the supernatural senses that would make such an exercise possible. She was setting me up for public failure and humiliation. But I also knew that backing down now would undermine everything I just said about strength and determination. Fine, I said, ignoring Kieran's sharp intake of breath beside me. I accept. Excellent. Lydia's smile was all teeth now. I'll even make it interesting. You can be on my team. I'll personally ensure you get the full werewolf hunting experience. The menace in her tone was unmistakable, but I'd committed now. I could only hope that the strength I'd discovered in myself today would be enough to survive whatever she had planned. As conversation gradually resumed around us, Kieran leaned close to my ear. You realize she's going to try to get you killed out there, he murmured. I know. And you're going anyway? I turned to meet his eyes, seeing concern and frustration, and something that might have been fear. I have to, Kieran. If I back down now, I'll never have their respect. And without their respect, you'll always be seen as my weakness rather than your own strength. He finished quietly. Exactly. He was quiet for a long moment, conflict warring in his expression. Finally, he nodded. Then we'd better make sure you're ready. As the dinner continued around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just committed to something far more dangerous than a simple hunt. But as Kieran's thumb traced across my knuckles in a gesture of support and promise, I also felt something I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I had someone who believed in my strength rather than my weakness. Someone who saw me as capable rather than fragile. It would have to be enough. Chapter 8. Midnight Preparations. The next day passed in a blur of intensive preparation. Kieran woke me before dawn, and we spent hours in the training grounds working on everything from silent movement through underbrush to basic tracking techniques. By afternoon, my muscles ached in places I'd forgotten existed, but I felt more prepared for the challenge ahead. Remember, Kieran said as we took a break near the forest edge, wolves hunt as a pack, but they also compete individually. Lydia will try to isolate you, make you fall behind, create situations where you look incompetent. So what's my strategy? Stay close to David. He'll be on her team too. I made sure of that. He's not as politically motivated as some of the others, and he genuinely wants you to succeed. Kieran handed me a water bottle, his fingers brushing mine. But more importantly, trust your instincts. You survived 3 weeks alone in these mountains. Those survival skills didn't disappear just because you're surrounded by werewolves now. I took a long drink, studying his profile in the afternoon sunlight. You're worried? Of course I'm worried. You're about to go into the wilderness with someone who sees you as a threat to her position in the pack hierarchy. Someone who has every reason to want you gone. Then why are you letting me do this? He turned to face me fully, his storm-gray eyes intense. Because you need to do this. Not for them, but for yourself. You need to prove to yourself that you're not the broken, frightened woman who fled from Marcus. You need to know that you can not only survive in our world, but thrive in it. His faith in me was both terrifying and exhilarating. What if I can't? What if I prove them right about human weakness? You won't. His certainty was absolute. Do you want to know how I know? How? Because 3 nights ago, I dreamed of you again. Not the vision of your death this time, but something different. I saw you running through moonlight, not fleeing but hunting. Your eyes were bright with purpose, your movements swift and sure. You weren't following the pack, you were leading them. My breath caught. You think it was another prophetic dream? I think, he said carefully, that the fates rarely show us only one possible future. Maybe what I saw was what could be, if you're brave enough to claim it. As evening approached, the pack began to gather in the main lodge for the traditional pre-hunt meal. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and competitive energy. Pack members moved with restless grace, their human forms barely containing the wolves beneath. I had dressed carefully, dark clothing that would blend with shadows, sturdy boots, my hair braided back to keep it out of my face. Kieran had given me a tactical belt with basic supplies: water, energy bars, a small first aid kit, and something he'd called a panic beacon, a device that would summon help if activated. Insurance, he'd said when I'd raised an eyebrow. You're about to spend the night in the woods with a woman who wants you gone. I'm not taking any chances. Now, as I entered the lodge, conversations died and eyes tracked my movement. I could feel their assessment, some curious, others hostile, a few almost pitying. Lydia stood near the head table, surrounded by her team. In addition to David, I recognized Marcus, a compact man with sandy hair who served as one of the pack's scouts, and Elena, a young woman barely out of her teens who looked eager to prove herself. "Ah, Sarah," Lydia called out as I approached. "Ready for your first hunt?" "As ready as I can be," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Excellent. Let me explain the rules." She gestured to a large map spread across the table, marked with colored pins and boundary lines. Each team takes a section of our territory. The goal is to complete a full patrol sweep, check for signs of intruders, territorial violations, or potential threats. We have until dawn. She pointed to a particularly rugged section of the map, far from any established trails. This will be our area. It's challenging terrain, but I'm sure you can handle it. I studied the map, noting the steep elevations, creek crossings, and dense forest marked in that section. It was deliberately chosen to be as difficult as possible for someone without supernatural abilities. "Looks perfect," I said, refusing to let her see my intimidation. David moved to stand beside me, offering a supportive smile. "Don't worry. I've run that section before. There are some tricky spots, but nothing we can't handle." Lydia's amber eyes flicked between us, calculation visible in their depths. "Of course, there's also the matter of keeping up. We'll be moving at pack speed once we shift. If you can't maintain the pace, then I'll figure out how to maintain it," I said firmly. "We'll see." She turned to address the room as Elder Matthias called for attention. "Teams, prepare for departure. Remember, this isn't just patrol work. It's a test of pack unity, individual capability, and territorial knowledge. May the best hunters win." As the teams began filing out toward the forest, Kieran caught my arm gently. "Be careful," he said quietly. "And remember, You have nothing to prove to anyone but yourself." I rose on my toes to kiss his cheek, surprising both of us with the gesture. His skin was warm under my lips, and I caught his sharp intake of breath at the contact. "I'll see you at dawn," I whispered. His hand cupped the back of my neck, holding me close for a heartbeat longer. "You'll see me at dawn," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion I couldn't quite identify. The forest was transformed in the moonlight, shadows and silver creating an otherworldly landscape. Lydia led our team to a designated starting point, where she began the process that still seemed like something out of a dream. The shift was both beautiful and terrifying to witness. One moment she was human, the next her form was blurring, stretching, bones cracking and reforming until a massive auburn wolf stood where she had been. The others followed suit, David's transformation revealing a sleek gray wolf, Marcus becoming a stocky brown wolf with intelligent amber eyes, and Elena shifting into a smaller but fierce-looking black wolf. They were magnificent, every one of them. Powerful predators perfectly suited to their environment. And I was just human, standing among gods and hoping I wouldn't embarrass myself too badly. "Well?" Lydia's voice came from the wolf's throat, distorted but unmistakably hers. "Ready to hunt?" "Lead the way," I said, praying my voice didn't shake. She took off into the underbrush at a pace that was clearly meant to challenge me. But 3 weeks of survival training had taught me things about moving through difficult terrain. And I'd always been a strong runner. I fell into the rhythm David had taught me. Steady, sustainable pace, watching the ground ahead, using my momentum to carry me over obstacles rather than fighting them. For the first hour, I kept up. Barely. And with considerably more effort than the wolves were expending, but I kept up. Lydia seemed almost disappointed by this, increasing the pace until even David shot her a warning look. We were deep in the forest now, far from any established trails, following game paths and creek beds through increasingly rugged terrain. My legs burned and my lungs ached, but I pushed forward, determined not to give Lydia the satisfaction of seeing me fail. That's when we encountered the scent that changed everything. All 4 wolves stopped simultaneously, hackles rising, low growls rumbling from their throats. Even in human form, I could sense the sudden shift in atmosphere, danger, immediate and deadly. "Blackwood pack." David's wolf voice was grim. 3 of them, maybe 4. Fresh scent. "This is our territory," Marcus growled. "They have no right to be here." But it was Lydia's reaction that chilled me to the bone. Instead of the alarm I expected, I saw something that looked almost like satisfaction cross her lupine features. "How unfortunate," she said, her tone suggesting it was anything but unfortunate. "It seems our little training exercise has become rather more dangerous. I do hope our human can handle it." As the implications of her words sank in, as I realized this might not be the coincidence she was pretending it was, I felt that familiar rage begin to burn in my chest. She had set me up, led me into enemy territory, put the entire team at risk, all to create a situation where I would either die or be forced to flee in terror. But as the growls of approaching enemies echoed through the forest, as Lydia's wolves prepared for battle, I made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't running anymore. Chapter 9. The hunt becomes the hunted. The Blackwood wolves emerged from the shadows like living nightmares. 3 massive forms with silver-gray coats and eyes that gleamed like cold stars in the moonlight. They moved with the coordinated precision of experienced hunters, spreading out to flank our small group. "Well, well," the largest wolf spoke, his voice a gravelly rumble that made my skin crawl. "What do we have here? Moonridge pups playing in the woods past their bedtime?" "This is Moonridge territory, Caden," Lydia replied, but I caught the slight tremor in her voice. Whatever game she'd been playing, This wasn't going according to plan. You and your pack have no business here. The wolf, Caden, laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Territory belongs to whoever can hold it, bitch. And it looks like you brought us a gift. His pale eyes fixed on me with predatory hunger. A human. How thoughtful. My blood turned to ice as I realized the true scope of Lydia's betrayal. She hadn't just led us into danger, she'd led us into an ambush. The question was whether she was complicit or simply criminally reckless. The human is under Alpha King Kieran's protection, David said, moving to place himself between the Blackwood wolves and me. Harm her, and you'll answer to him personally. Kieran Blackthorn, Caden mused. Yes, I've heard about his new pet. Victor is quite interested in meeting her. I'm sure he'd be grateful if we brought her back alive. Victor Blackwood. Even I knew that name. The rival alpha who'd been challenging Kieran's territory for decades. The realization that I'd become a pawn in their larger conflict hit me like a physical blow. Over my dead body, Marcus growled, his compact wolf form bristling with aggression. That can be arranged, one of Caden's companions said pleasantly. The tension stretched taut as both sides prepared for violence. But something was bothering me about the whole situation. Something beyond the obvious danger. How did you know? I asked suddenly, my voice cutting through the hostile posturing. All eyes turned to me, both wolf and human expressions showing surprise at my interruption. How did you know we'd be here? This section of territory is isolated, difficult to access. You didn't just stumble across us. I looked directly at Lydia, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Someone told you we'd be here. Lydia's wolf form went very still. Sarah, this isn't the time. Isn't it? I stepped forward, that familiar rage building in my chest. You've been planning this from the moment I accepted your challenge. You led us into enemy territory, knowing they'd be waiting. The question is whether you're working with them or just using them to get rid of me. You're being paranoid, Lydia snapped, but David was studying her with growing suspicion. Are you? Caden's laugh was genuinely amused. Oh, this is rich. The Moonridge pack is eating itself alive, and we don't even have to lift a paw. Shut up, Caden, Lydia snarled. But it was too late. The damage was done, the truth exposed in that moment of his amusement. Whatever Lydia's exact plan had been, the Blackwood wolves had been counting on our presence here. You treacherous bitch, Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. You sold us out. I did what was necessary for the pack, Lydia replied, her defiance cracking to reveal desperation underneath. She's a liability, a human who's made our alpha weak, distracted. She'll get us all killed eventually. So you decided to get us killed now instead? Elena's young voice was sharp with betrayal. I was going to lead you away from the ambush, Lydia said quickly. Make it look like an accident, like she couldn't keep up and got lost. No one would have been hurt except me, I finished. You were going to serve me up to Victor Blackwood like a peace offering. It would have solved everything, she said, and the complete lack of remorse in her voice was chilling. Victor gets what he wants. Kieran is freed from his obsession with you, and the pack returns to normal. Normal, I repeated, that cold rage crystallizing into something sharp and deadly. You mean weak. You mean submissive. You mean everyone falling in line with your vision of how things should be. David took a step toward her, his wolf form radiating threat. Lydia, you've committed treason against your own pack, against your Alpha King. Have I? She backed away, but there was nowhere to run. The Blackwood wolves had closed the circle. Or have I done what none of you have the courage to do? That's when Caden struck. His attack wasn't directed at Lydia, as I'd expected, but at David, the most dangerous fighter in our group. The two wolves collided in a snarling mass of teeth and claws, rolling across the forest floor in deadly combat. Chaos erupted. Marcus and Elena engaged the other two Blackwood wolves while Lydia stood frozen, apparently realizing that her carefully laid plans had spiraled completely out of control. But I wasn't watching the fight. I was remembering Kieran's words from the training session. The warrior in you is there, Sarah. We just need to wake her up. Moving on pure instinct, I grabbed a fallen branch, heavy, solid, the perfect weight for a makeshift weapon. As one of the Blackwood wolves broke free from Elena's attack and turned toward me, I didn't hesitate. I swung with everything I had, connecting with the side of his skull with a sickening crack. The wolf yelped and stumbled, giving Elena the opening she needed to leap back into the fight. Behind you. Marcus's warning came just in time for me to spin and face Caden, who had apparently decided that eliminating me was worth breaking off his fight with David. But something had changed in me during that first successful strike. The fear was still there, but it was buried beneath something stronger, the same fierce rage I'd felt during training, amplified by the betrayal and danger surrounding me. As Caden lunged, I didn't freeze. I didn't cower. Instead, I dove to the side, rolling across the forest floor and coming up with another branch. This one sharper, more like a spear than a club. "You want me?" I snarled, planting my feet and raising the makeshift weapon. "Come and take me." Caden's pale eyes widened slightly. Apparently, cowering prey wasn't supposed to bare its teeth. But he recovered quickly, circling me with predatory grace. "I have to admit," he said conversationally, "you're more interesting than I expected. Victor thought you'd be some simpering human female, completely dependent on Kieran's protection. But you've got spirit." "More than you know," I replied, tracking his movement while staying aware of the ongoing battles around me. "Good. It'll make breaking you so much sweeter." He attacked then, a blur of silver-gray fur and snapping teeth. But I'd learned something important in the past few days. I was stronger than I'd ever believed possible. And more than that, I was done being anyone's victim. As his weight slammed into me, driving us both to the ground, I managed to keep hold of my weapon and drive it upward. The point caught him in the shoulder, not a killing blow, but enough to make him howl in pain and surprise. "Impossible," he gasped, staggering back. "You're just human." "Yeah," I said, climbing to my feet and hefting my bloodied spear. "I'm human, which means I fight dirty." Before he could recover, I activated the panic beacon Kieran had given me. The device let out a high-pitched wail that echoed through the forest, a sound that would bring the full might of the Moonridge pack down on this location. Caden's expression shifted from predatory confidence to alarm. "You little bitch." "That's right. And now you've got about 10 minutes before my mate arrives with half the pack behind him." I raised my weapon again, feeling power flow through me like electricity. "So the question is, do you really want to be here when that happens?" The word mate had slipped out without conscious thought, but it felt right on my lips. More than right, it felt like a fundamental truth I was finally brave enough to speak aloud. Around us, the other fights were winding down. David had Lydia pinned, while Marcus and Elena had driven off the other two Blackwood wolves. Caden looked around, taking stock of his deteriorating situation. With a snarl of frustration, he began backing toward the tree line. "This isn't over," he warned. "Victor wants you, human. He'll keep coming until he has you." "Let him come," I replied, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "But next time, he'd better bring more wolves." As the Blackwood pack melted back into the shadows, I stood there in the moonlight, covered in dirt and blood, holding a makeshift spear like some kind of primitive warrior goddess. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely alive. Chapter 10. The Alpha's Fury. The howl that echoed through the forest 10 minutes later was unlike anything I'd ever heard. pure rage and territorial dominance given voice. It seemed to shake the very trees, sending night birds fleeing from their roosts and making the remaining members of our hunting party instinctively lower their heads in submission. All except me. Something about that sound, primal and fierce as it was, filled me with relief rather than fear. Kieran was coming. The pack arrived like a force of nature, a dozen wolves moving through the forest with deadly purpose. But it was Kieran who commanded attention as he burst into the clearing, his massive black wolf form radiating power that made the air itself seem to thicken. His transformation back to human form was swift and fluid, but the fury burning in his storm-gray eyes remained unchanged. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance, me standing bloodied but defiant with my makeshift spear, Lydia pinned beneath David's wolf form, the scattered signs of recent combat. What happened? His voice carried the absolute authority of an alpha king, and I saw several pack members flinch at the contained violence in those two words. Blackwood pack ambush, David reported, shifting back to human form but keeping one hand firmly on Lydia's shoulder. 3 of them, led by Caden. They were waiting for us. Waiting? Kieran's eyes narrowed dangerously. How did they know to wait? The silence stretched taut, as no one wanted to be the one to voice the obvious answer. Finally, I stepped forward. Because Lydia told them where we'd be, I said quietly. She led us into enemy territory, knowing they'd be there. Kieran went completely still, and somehow that stillness was more terrifying than any display of rage would have been. When he turned to look at Lydia, the temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. Lydia had shifted back to human form, and now she knelt in the forest loam, defiant despite her obvious fear. "I did what I thought was best for the pack," she said, lifting her chin. "She's a liability, Kieran. A weakness that will get us all killed." "So you decided to hand her over to Victor Blackwood?" The menace in Kieran's tone made several pack members step back. "I was going to make it look like an accident," Lydia insisted. "Lead the others away. Let the Blackwood wolves take her. No one would have been hurt except the woman under my protection. The woman I claimed before the entire pack." Kieran's power rolled off him in waves, and I watched in fascination as the other werewolves instinctively lowered their gazes. "The woman you just called my mate." My breath caught. He'd heard that. Somehow, across miles of forest, he'd heard me call myself his mate. "She's not pack," Lydia said desperately. "She's human. She doesn't belong." "She belongs where I say she belongs," Kieran cut her off. "And right now, she's shown more loyalty to this pack than you have." He moved to stand beside me, his presence both protective and possessive. "Tell me what happened," he said, his tone gentler now but his eyes never leaving Lydia. I gave him a concise report. Lydia's deliberate choice of territory, the convenient ambush, her obvious foreknowledge of the Blackwood wolves' presence. As I spoke, I watched his expression grow darker and more dangerous. "And how did you handle the attack?" he asked when I'd finished. "She fought," Elena said, her young voice filled with admiration. "Like a warrior. She took down one of the Blackwood wolves with nothing but a tree branch, and when Caden came after her, she didn't run. She stood her ground and called for backup." Pride flickered in Kieran's eyes as he looked at me. "Is that so?" "It was self-defense," I said, suddenly feeling self-conscious under the attention of the entire pack. "I did what I had to do." "No," he said firmly. "You did what a pack member does. You protected your teammates and defended our territory." He raised his voice so it carried to every werewolf present. "Let it be known that Sarah Blackwood has proven herself in battle. She has spilled enemy blood in defense of Moonridge Pack lands. by right of combat and courage, she has earned her place among us." Murmurs of surprise and approval rippled through the assembled wolves. I saw respect in eyes that had held only suspicion before, acceptance from pack members who'd viewed me as a liability just hours earlier. But it was Lydia's reaction that chilled me. The hatred in her amber eyes was pure and venomous, and I realized that this humiliation had transformed her from a political rival into a true enemy. "The punishment for treason is exile," Elder Matthias said, stepping forward. "Or death, at the Alpha's discretion." "Please," Lydia said, the first crack in her defiant facade appearing. "I've served this pack for 40 years. I've bled for our territory, fought our enemies, upheld our traditions. One mistake." "One mistake?" Kieran's laugh was cold as winter wind. "You conspired with our enemies to kidnap a woman under my protection. You put 4 pack members in mortal danger to satisfy your personal grudges. You betrayed oaths of loyalty that are sacred to our kind." He leaned down to meet her eyes. "That's not a mistake, Lydia. That's treason." "So what's it to be?" Marcus asked. "Exile or execution?" Kieran was quiet for a long moment, studying Lydia with those storm-gray eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute judgment. "Exile. You have until dawn to be beyond our borders. If you ever set foot in Moonridge territory again, if you ever threaten anyone under my protection again, I will hunt you down personally and show you what real pack justice looks like." Relief flashed across Lydia's face, followed immediately by renewed hatred as she realized the full implications of exile. For a werewolf, banishment from their pack was a fate worse than death. It meant becoming a rogue, forever cut off from the social bonds that defined their existence. "This isn't over," she said, climbing to her feet with as much dignity as she could muster. "She'll be your downfall, Kieran. Mark my words." "The only one marking anything tonight is you," he replied coldly. "Mark the path that leads you away from my territory and never brings you back." As Lydia melted into the shadows, several pack members following to ensure she actually left, Kieran finally turned his full attention to me. The rage that had consumed him moments before was fading, replaced by something softer, but no less intense. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands skimming over my arms and shoulders, checking for injuries with careful thoroughness. "Just scratches," I assured him, though I was suddenly aware of various aches and pains now that the adrenaline was fading. "Nothing serious." "You could have been killed," he said, and I heard the raw fear beneath his anger. "When I got your signal, when I realized what had happened. But I wasn't killed. I fought back. I survived. And more than that." I looked around at the pack members who were now regarding me with genuine respect. I proved I belong here. "You proved something else too," he said quietly, his voice pitched for my ears alone. "What's that?" "You called yourself my mate." Heat flooded my cheeks. It was in the heat of the moment. I was trying to intimidate them, make them think twice about Sarah. My name on his lips stopped my babbling explanation. "Did you mean it?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications I was only beginning to understand. Around us, the pack was beginning to disperse, their voices fading as they headed back toward the main compound. But Kieran and I remained frozen in this moment, this crossroads where everything would change based on my answer. I thought about Marcus, about the way he'd claimed to love me while systematically destroying who I was. I thought about the fear and isolation that had defined my life for so long. And then I thought about the way Kieran looked at me, not as property to be controlled, but as a person to be cherished. Not as weakness to be protected, but as strength to be admired. "Yes," I whispered. "I meant it." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. "Good," he said, pulling me into his arms. Because I've been yours since the moment I saw you. As his lips found mine in a kiss that tasted of moonlight and promises, I realized that everything I'd been through, Marcus's abuse, my desperate flight, the terror and humiliation of that judgment circle, had led me to this moment. To him, to home, to the woman I was always meant to be. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Chapter 11. The Mating Bond. The kiss that began in the moonlit forest continued long after we'd returned to Kieran's cabin, deepening into something that made my blood sing and my heart race. His hands were gentle but urgent as they framed my face, as if he couldn't quite believe I was real, that I was here, that I was his. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, I found myself pressed against his front door with his body caging me in, not trapping, but sheltering. "Sarah," he said, my name a prayer on his lips. "Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. The mating bond between our kinds, it's permanent. Sacred. It will change you in ways you can't imagine." I searched his storm-gray eyes, seeing vulnerability there that he rarely showed. "What kind of changes?" "Physical ones. Your senses will sharpen, your strength will increase, your lifespan will extend to match mine." His thumb traced across my lower lip, sending shivers through me. "But the emotional changes are more profound. You'll feel everything I feel, know my thoughts, share my dreams, and I'll know yours." The magnitude of what he was describing should have terrified me. Complete emotional and psychic intimacy with another person, sharing not just my body, but my very soul. A permanent connection that would last for centuries. "Will it hurt?" I asked quietly. "The opposite." His voice was rough with desire and something deeper. "It's said to be the most intense pleasure imaginable. But Sarah, you need to understand. There have been very few successful matings between our kinds. The bond doesn't always take. And when it fails, what happens? The human dies." He said it bluntly, refusing to sugarcoat the risk. "The werewolf soul is too intense, too primal for most humans to survive bonding with. Only the strongest can withstand it." I stared at him, processing this revelation. He was asking me to risk my life for the chance at forever with him. And more than that, he was trusting me with knowledge that could destroy us both if I chose to run. "How do you know if someone is strong enough?" I asked. "You don't." "Not for certain." He leaned his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my skin. "But Elena survived it. For 2 years, she carried my bond and thrived under it. Until Victor's wolves killed her." "And you think I'm like her? Strong enough?" "I think," he said carefully, "that you've already survived things that would have broken a weaker person. I think you've proven your strength over and over again. But I also think the choice has to be yours, made with full knowledge of the risks." I closed my eyes, trying to imagine what life would be like if I said no. He would honor my choice. I knew that. He would continue to protect me, to care for me, perhaps even to love me. But there would always be a distance between us, a fundamental separation that could never be fully bridged. And then I tried to imagine life as his true mate. Centuries of shared existence, of knowing and being known completely, of being part of something larger and more powerful than myself. The choice, when I really examined it, wasn't difficult at all. "I want this," I said, opening my eyes to meet his gaze. "I want you. All of you. For as long as we both exist." The relief and joy that flooded his expression took my breath away. "You're certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He swept me up in his arms then, carrying me through the cabin to his bedroom with movements that were swift but careful. The space was dimly lit by moonlight streaming through tall windows, casting everything in silver and shadow. When he set me down beside the massive bed, his hands shook slightly as they moved to the hem of my borrowed sweater. "We can stop at any time," he said. "If you change your mind, if you're frightened." I silenced him by catching his hands and guiding them upward, helping him lift the sweater over my head. "I'm not changing my mind, Kieran. I'm exactly where I want to be." What followed was a dance of discovery and desire, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Kieran's touch was reverent, worshipful, as if I was something precious and fragile that might disappear if he wasn't careful enough. But there was hunger beneath his gentleness, a primal need that made my pulse race and my skin burn. When his lips found the sensitive spot where my neck met my shoulder, when his teeth grazed the skin there in a gesture that was more than human, I felt something deep inside me respond, not with fear, but with answering wildness. "There!" I gasped, my hands fisting in his dark hair. "Right there. That's where I'll mark you," he said against my skin, his voice rough with desire. "Where the bond will anchor itself. Are you ready?" I nodded, beyond words now, lost in sensations I'd never dreamed possible. But as his teeth began to apply pressure, as I felt the first sharp bite of pain that would transform into something else entirely, a sound from outside shattered the moment. Howls. Multiple wolves, all calling in distress and alarm. Kieran's head snapped up, his entire body going rigid. "No," he breathed. "Not now." The howls came again, closer this time, and I could hear the sound of running feet on the wooden porch outside. "Alpha King!" David's voice was urgent, panicked. "We need you, now!" Kieran closed his eyes, pain and frustration warring across his features. "I have to—" "I know," I said softly, though every nerve in my body was screaming in protest at the interruption. "Go. Handle whatever crisis this is." He pulled on his clothes with swift efficiency, but his eyes never left mine. "This isn't over," he said fiercely. "The moment this is resolved, we finish what we started. I'll be here," I promised. He kissed me then, hard and possessive, acclaiming even without the formal bond. When he broke away, his eyes had gone wolf gold with emotion. "Stay inside," he ordered. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me." As he disappeared out the front door, I heard David's urgent report. "It's Victor Blackwood. He's crossed into our territory with a full war party. 50 wolves, maybe more. They're heading straight for the compound." My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a coincidence. Victor had launched a full-scale assault on Moonridge Pack territory. And the timing couldn't be worse. Kieran would have to lead his pack into battle while distracted by our interrupted mating, while his mind was divided between protecting his people and protecting me. As I dressed quickly and moved to the window, I could see wolves streaming through the forest toward defensive positions. The pack was mobilizing for war, and somewhere out there in the darkness, an enemy alpha was coming for what he believed was his prize. Me. I pressed my hand to the spot on my neck where Kieran's mark would have been, where the mating bond should have anchored itself. We'd been so close, minutes away from completing something that would have changed everything. Instead, I was still human, still vulnerable, still the weak link that Victor could exploit to destroy the man I loved. But as I watched Kieran emerge from the cabin in his Alpha King form, power radiating from him like a physical force, I made a decision that would have consequences none of us could foresee. If Victor Blackwood wanted me, he could come and take me. But he'd better be prepared for the fight of his life. Because while I might still be human, I was no longer the broken, frightened woman who'd fled into these mountains. I was Sarah Blackwood, mate to the Alpha King, and I would not go down without a fight. The war for Moonridge Pack, and for my future, was about to begin. Chapter 12. Blood Moon Rising. The battle raged through the forest with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the mountains. From Kieran's window, I could see flashes of movement in the darkness. Wolves clashing in deadly combat, the night air filled with snarls and howls that spoke of ancient territorial disputes finally coming to a head. But Victor Blackwood was clever. While the main force of his war party engaged Kieran's defenders at the compound's perimeter, a smaller group had circled around to approach the Alpha King's personal cabin. I saw them coming through the trees, 5 wolves moving with the deadly purpose of an assassination squad. I had perhaps 2 minutes before they reached me. The smart thing would have been to activate the panic beacon again, to hide and wait for rescue. But as I watched Kieran's massive black wolf form leading the charge against impossible odds, as I realized how divided his attention would be between the battle and my safety, I knew there was only one choice that made sense. I had to remove myself as a liability. Permanently. Moving quickly, I gathered the few weapons I could find. A kitchen knife, a heavy flashlight, the remains of my makeshift spear from the earlier battle. Then I did something that would have horrified the frightened woman I'd been just weeks ago. I opened the front door and stepped outside. "Looking for me?" I called out as the Blackwood wolves emerged from the forest. They stopped, clearly surprised to find their target presenting herself so openly. The largest of them, a silver-gray wolf with scars across his muzzle, shifted to human form. "Victor will be pleased," he said with a cold smile. "He thought we'd have to drag you kicking and screaming from Blackthorn's bed." "I'm not going anywhere with you," I replied, raising my knife. "But if you want me, you're welcome to try and take me." He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You think that little blade will save you? You're just human, girl. Weak, pathetic. A temporary plaything for an alpha who's forgotten his place." "You're right," I said, taking a step backward toward the forest. "I am just human, which means I don't fight fair." Before he could respond, I hurled the flashlight at his head, not to injure, but to distract, and bolted into the trees. Behind me, I heard the sounds of pursuit, exactly as I'd hoped. I ran deeper into the forest, away from the main battle, leading Victor's wolves on a chase that would draw them far from the compound and from Kieran. My knowledge of these mountains, gained during my desperate flight weeks ago, served me well. I knew every game trail, every creek crossing, every hidden ravine that might give me an advantage. But werewolves were faster, stronger, and could track by scent. It was only a matter of time before they caught me. When they finally cornered me in a small clearing beside a rushing stream, I was exhausted, bloodied from branches and thorns, but far from defeated. The 5 Blackwood wolves circled me with predatory satisfaction, their human forms menacing in the moonlight. "Enough games," the scarred leader said. "Victor wants you alive, but he didn't say unharmed." That's when the howls split the night, a sound of pure rage and anguish that made every creature in the forest freeze in terror. It was Kieran, and he had discovered my absence. "He's coming," I said with savage satisfaction. "You led him right to you." The Blackwood wolves exchanged uneasy glances. Whatever their plan had been, it clearly hadn't accounted for facing an enraged Alpha King in single combat. "Then we finish this quickly," the leader snarled, lunging toward me. But he never reached me. Kieran exploded from the forest like an avenging god, his massive wolf form intercepting the attack with bone-crushing force. The 2 wolves rolled across the clearing in a snarling mass of teeth and claws, and I knew I was witnessing a battle that would determine the fate of both packs. The other 4 Blackwood wolves hesitated, torn between helping their leader and following their original orders to capture me. That moment of indecision cost them dearly as more Moonridge wolves poured into the clearing. David, Marcus, Elena, and others who had followed their Alpha King's desperate charge through the forest. What followed was swift and brutal. The Blackwood wolves fought with the desperation of cornered animals, but they were outnumbered and far from their own territory. One by one, they fell to the superior coordination and fury of the Moonridge pack. In the center of it all, Kieran and the scarred leader continued their deadly dance. Both wolves were bleeding now, both showing signs of exhaustion, but neither willing to yield. This was more than a fight. It was a challenge for dominance, for the right to claim territory and mate. The scarred wolf, I realized this must be one of Victor's sons or lieutenants, was skilled and vicious, but he lacked Kieran's centuries of experience and the driving need to protect what he loved. When the end came, it was swift and final. Kieran's jaws closed around his opponent's throat, and the forest fell silent. As the surviving Blackwood wolves fled into the night, Kieran shifted back to human form and stumbled toward me. He was covered in blood and cuts, exhaustion evident in every line of his body, but his eyes blazed with relief and something deeper. "Are you insane?" he demanded, pulling me into his arms with desperate intensity. "Do you have any idea what you put me through? When I found the cabin empty, when I realized you'd deliberately drawn them away, I couldn't let you fight while worrying about me," I said, my words muffled against his chest. "I couldn't be the weakness that got you killed. You're not my weakness," he said fiercely. "You're my strength. Don't you understand that yet?" Before I could respond, he was kissing me with desperate hunger, his hands tangling in my hair as if he needed to reassure himself that I was real, that I was safe, that I was his. "The bond," I gasped between kisses. "We need to complete it. Before Victor regroups. Before anything else can come between us." "Are you certain? After tonight? After seeing what our world really looks like?" "I've never been more certain of anything," I said, echoing my earlier words. "Make me yours, Kieran. Completely and forever." This time, there were no interruptions. There in the moonlit clearing, surrounded by the aftermath of battle and the promise of dawn, Kieran claimed me as his mate, in the most ancient and sacred way known to his kind. The pain of his bite was sharp and immediate, but it transformed almost instantly into pleasure so intense it bordered on transcendent. I felt his soul rushing into mine, felt our life forces intertwining in ways that went beyond physical touch or emotional connection. I was changing. I could feel it, my senses sharpening until I could hear heartbeats from miles away, my strength increasing until I felt like I could move mountains, my very essence expanding to accommodate the wild, primal power that was now part of me. But more than that, I could feel Kieran. His love, his devotion, his absolute commitment to our bond. 3 centuries of loneliness dissolved beneath the weight of connection so complete it brought tears to my eyes. When it was over, when the transformation had run its course, I found myself looking at the world through new eyes. Everything was sharper, brighter, more vivid than it had ever been. And at the center of it all was Kieran, my mate, my alpha, my home. "Welcome to the pack," he said softly, pressing his forehead against mine. "Welcome to forever." As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, I realized that my journey was finally complete. The frightened woman who had fled into these wilderness was gone, replaced by someone stronger, braver, and infinitely more alive. I was Sarah Blackwood, mate to the Alpha King, member of the Moonridge pack, and guardian of a love that would last for centuries to come. And I had never felt more like myself in my entire life.